Welcome to Go For Side Effects. I'm your host, Kevin Simon. You all know my co-host, John. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Good to be here.
So we got an interesting program tonight. Y'all all know Pete and Kristi, who was on the program about, a couple months ago? Month and a half, a couple months ago. She wants to give a little bit of an update. But y'all are not going to be able to see our other guest. She has called in. She is Zoomed with us, and it's Dr. Golomb. Doctor, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Doing good. So all my listeners, if y'all happen to hear her and you cannot see her, she's here. It's not a ghost. All right? and we're not playing any tricks on you yet. So, Kristi, give us an update about Pete.
Things have actually gotten a little bit worse. I think the heat and humidity is causing some more problems. Now we have some edema that we didn't have, and now we're looking at some bone issues. He was in the urgent care last week with a lot of pain, which he lives with, but it was more severe. Did 2 cognitive tests this week, and it was pretty rough. And it's hard on him when they're asking questions that he can't answer, and he's hurting all the way around. He's hurting.
I'm sorry.
Still, of course, trying to get to the bottom of this or finding the best treatment for him. Pete does he does pharmaceuticals. I'm a supplement person. So we have a little bit different approaches at things. But when we do that, I think we get both worlds brought into it. So we're trying to manage, doing some of the natural stuff and some pharmaceuticals. So, yeah.
So with that being said, I know because we've been talking a couple of days and you've been back and forth to the VA awfully a lot. And I know you're having issues, especially with doing the caregiver, which I think is a total bunch of bull crap. As my mom would want me to say, oh, snap, that is completely wrong.
Yeah.
And she told me I said shit too much on there. So she said, start saying oh, snap. And I was like, yes, ma'am. She's probably listening. So mama said oh, snap once. Okay. So I know that the caregiver program should be awarded to anybody who's basically almost homebound, who is having the difficulty Pete is having. And so I do wish you the best. If you want to talk a little bit about that, you can. And then you can bring in the Dr. Golomb.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So, just like CMP exams and your benefits, Gulf War, Persian Gulf War veterans, because we don't have an ICD code, you guys are getting kicked down the road further and further. You have higher denials, you have more testing, Pete's getting the same runaround, because these things don't have big ratings. And then you have to have all these stacked up on top of each other to get to the 100%. Now Pete's at 100%. And that's because of his PTSD, and we deal with that a lot. And we've been dealing with it since I've met him. But so he's the supervision, protection, and instruction. SPIs is what we call it. He actually, now he's to the point where I have to help him get out of bed. Sometimes I have to help him roll over because he's so weak. So it is going into the daily living help too now, the ADLs. But almost every Persian Gulf War caregiver spouse that I've talked to has been denied, especially if they put in for supervision, protection, and instruction. And ours relied mostly on this neuropsych exam that the VA did, and this would happen last year. And I was so mad. And one of his other, Pete's counselor was upset with it. And I was upset with it. I just didn't feel I had the chops to go up against a neuropsychologist with all these degrees on his wall. So I kind of sat on it for a while and just bit my tongue. And what they did was they said he had conversion disorder. And basically, that's the same thing the DOD did in 92. It's in your head. You're making this up. It's not real. all these things can't be happening to one person, and that was part of it. You just have way too many symptoms. This is way too complex. This is, you've got to be making this stuff up. And, when I started, we were denied caregiver in November. I can't leave Pete alone.
But you also have letters.
What's that?
You also have letters that state that he needs a caregiver.
Yes. And this is part of the process, was that he was evaluated, and the VA had 2 people evaluate him, and they both said he needed a caregiver, plus 2 of his doctors said the same thing. And we were still denied because they cherry picked the medical file. And I have one attorney who calls that administrative evil, and I think he's right on it. And they denied us. They called me an emotional support person. It took me a few months to calm down enough that I could even.
I was gonna say
talk about without swearing.
I would have been an emotional support person after I beat the ever living snap out of them.
Well, it did. It took me 6 months to get this appeal done, and normally I'm a person that turns around and hands it, bam, right back at them. I did hire an outside neuropsych to go through this process and look at, that conversion, that it's in your head diagnosis. And really, I want to appeal out there, because if any Persian Gulf War veteran has had that diagnosis ever, or even suggested that might be it, a conversion disorder or a functional neurological disorder, please contact Kevin or myself. We're on Facebook. There's ways to find us. And let us know. We need.
I hate to interrupt, but contact me as well. I have a very deep interest in this fake diagnosis of all in your head, and I have an essay that I'll pass on to you about that issue. And I hate to interrupt again, but remind me also that we have a paper that was just accepted for publication that shows that all these symptoms that Gulf War veterans have, that's exactly what you expect and see when the energy powerhouses of cells are disrupted. And what we found in our study was that the degree of mitochondrial injury, the degree of injury to these basically batteries for cells that provide energy, related to the severity of Gulf War illness across like this severity scale with 20 different unrelated symptoms.
That's crazy.
So that's what happens. Like, energy is needed for every cell in the body, and it is classic when those energy powerhouses cells are disrupted that there are symptoms spanning many different areas. And people say, oh, you can't have this and this and this and this and this and this and this, because doctors are trained to think that only organs get affected instead of things like mitochondria that affect all the different organs. So maybe that'll help you if you bring that into the doctor. But in any case, I think it's worth a try.
Well, even as you say that, Dr. Golomb, and everybody's Golomb, all right, y'all, if I mess this up.
That's perfect. You got it right.
That's right. If I chop this up, just mark it as my redneck language. Anyway, you are correct. I mean, there's so many things out there that they have chalked up on us that is just such BS. That, I mean, when we walk into these doctors' office and they say, hey, you know, what's going on with you? I have Gulf War illness. Well, what's that? It's in a freaking nursing book, you morons. It really is. It's in the 4th chapter. My wife, the 4th semester. It talks about Gulf War illness, ALS. I mean, come on. If it's in that book, how in the hell don't y'all know? Y'all are doctors.
Yeah.
And so, I know it's going to have Kristi bring you in this. And since you brought yourself into this, I want you to keep going with what the studies and what is everything that is going on.
Oh, I'm so sorry I interrupted.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. I'm glad you
Let's
did.
just make sure that her contact information, because that is where the information is going to go. If you were to contact Kevin and I, we'd be sending it to her. So let's make sure her information makes it in the comments.
I'll put her email up if that's okay with you.
Great.
Yeah, that is okay with me. We've got a different email for the Golomb Research Group, which I think is Golomb Research Group at health.ucsc.edu. which is probably a better way to email me. But since I'm not positive of that, then maybe just bgolomb.
Yeah, and I'll drop it in there. I have it.
Okay, yeah, just drop it to me because I am not going to remember that.
I was gonna say that would be tough to remember.
But let's get into the studies, because y'all are doing quite a bit of studies that's going on.
Yeah.
Let's get into the first one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me just kind of start with the one we just mentioned, which is done with. But that one actually is the only really invasive study that we've ever done on Gulf War veterans, where we actually took a biopsy of their muscle tissue and then had experts in these energy powerhouses, without knowing who was a Gulf War veteran and who was the control, evaluate how those mitochondria did their job. Were they, good at producing cell energy or not? And there are a few different ways that can be looked at. As you know, you get energy from sugar and you get energy from fat, and you also produce heat. And it turns out that those mitochondria have different things where they get energy from sugar, where they get energy from fat, or instead of producing energy in that way, they produce heat. And what was super interesting was that the degree of impairment in the sugar using form of energy production was what was related most to the brain effects. And that is perfect, because the brain is 2% of the body weight. It uses 50% of the sugar of the total body, 50% of the glucose of the total body, even though it's only 2% of the body weight. So the brain mostly uses sugar for energy, and it was the sugar using mitochondria energy production that tied most to brain stuff. The muscles mostly use fat. It's called fatty acid oxidation, fancy term. And sure enough, the degree of muscle impairment, including things like reported muscle weakness, related most to the degree of impairment in that energy production from fat. And then one of the 20 top symptoms in Gulf War veterans is heat dysregulation. Like, you get hot or cold when other people don't, or have cold hands or feet. And that one didn't relate to either of those, but there's something called, fancy term, uncoupled respiration, which just means that the oxygen, and we're all aerobic organisms, which means that we use oxygen to make energy, which is why you can only go a few minutes without breathing. And oxygen multiplies how much energy you make per sugar molecule, for example, by 13-fold, which is why it's so important to get enough oxygen, and why most Gulf War veterans who are ill should be checked for sleep apnea, because the muscles are weak. A lot of them have sleep apnea, and then that makes all the symptoms worse.
Hey, Doc, I got a quick question. So you say our body has a hard time, the Gulf War veterans in particular's body have a hard time regulating heat. Would that explain, I've always, sweat pretty easily, but there was, when I was still able to work, I was sweating so profusely. I was like, this is not right. Is that?
There are two things that may relate to that. One is this temperature dysregulation. That was related to what's called uncoupled respiration, which is where the oxygen use is tied to heat production instead of energy production. And where that was screwed up, people reported more of the temperature regulation problems. But the other thing is that several of the big classes of drugs and chemicals that veterans were exposed to in the Gulf War are drugs that, there's like a big, long, fancy term for this. Acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. I just said it, sorry. So acetylcholine is that nerve chemical that is affected in Alzheimer's disease, but it's also the nerve signaling chemical that's used in muscle. And it's also the one that's used for secretions like sweating, etc. And the evidence, and so both the organophosphate and carbamate pesticides that a lot of veterans were exposed to, those are what are called these acetylcholinesterase inhibitors that dysregulate the action of this acetylcholine. And usually the immediate, and that also includes the pyridostigmine bromide, the PB NAPS packs, they called them, those nerve gas pretreatment pills that veterans were given. Those are in that same chemical class. And then so is nerve gas. Sarin and cyclosarin are also the same class of thing, acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So acetylcholine is the nerve signaling chemical. Acetylcholinesterase is the enzyme that breaks that down. And you want to break it down because, signaling requires not just that the signal be put out, but that it go away. So if you have a black and white TV, if every element is on and it's all white, there's no communication happening. So you need the elements to come off as well as go on for signaling and messaging to happen. So the problem with so there's this chemical, this enzyme, acetylcholinesterase, that gets rid of the acetylcholine when it's not needed. And then all these drugs and chemicals, the organophosphate, nerve gas, the organophosphate pesticide, the PB pills, they all inhibit that clearing enzyme. So the short-term effect is that it raises levels of acetylcholine. But the long-term effect in animal studies, and I think there are also human studies, but lots of animal studies show that it dysregulates acetylcholine. The body responds to that short-term high acetylcholine by doing a lot of things to reduce acetylcholine, but then other parts of the body try to offset that action, and then what you have is a net complete screw-up of the acetylcholine system. And secretions like sweating are one of the consequences. So that could be both the chemical action and also the cell energy action could be contributing to that. If you have, different sweating, abnormal temperature regulation,
that's definitely been an issue. I mean, it was to the point, it was just disgusting in that it was to the point where it was almost, and sounds really gross, but almost like a stream of sweat off my forehead. It was, it was ridiculous. I'm like, this ain't, I'd have to change out my shirt and stuff. I said, I might be a little bit heavier guy, but this ain't right.
Okay. Right. So my question for that also too, would the anthrax vaccine fall in under this also?
Does which fall under it?
Anthrax vaccine also.
That is not in that chemical class. It's a different kind of chemical, but that is definitely one of the other Gulf War exposures that a lot of different studies have shown related to higher rates of illness problems.
Okay. That's, and see, and this is interesting because now we kind of get more of an understanding kind of what is going on. I think that's basically the first time I actually understood a doctor. Son of a gun.
Yeah, no, you did a good job, Dr. Golomb. I mean,
exactly.
Actually, I was a little concerned, like I mentioned to you at the beginning, but I followed it pretty well. I mean,
oh, good.
You explained it well.
And
good. Well, definitely stop me if I don't.
Oh no, and then I would also like to go into the other studies that are going on also, and so we're going to hit all of them because there's a lot of them that everybody needs to know, and that it is even good for people that weren't in the Gulf War to understand what we're going through.
I 100% agree with you, and the lessons from Gulf War veterans are important to everybody, both because we can all be exposed to some of those chemicals too, and also because you guys were a major mixed toxin exposure. And guess what? There are other events like what's happening in East Palestine, Ohio, where a bunch of people were also exposed to mixed toxins. And we've been talking to some of those people, and some of them are having the same kinds of problems that Gulf War veterans have. So, I think a lot of Gulf War veterans feel like they're the forgotten veterans. A lot of people care about, IED explosions and traumatic brain injury and PTSD with much less attention to Gulf War illness. But Gulf War veterans are you guys are not only important, and understanding what's going on with you is not only important because you deserve it, because you honorably served your country and came back with health problems as a direct consequence of your valorous service, and so we owe it to you. But if that weren't enough, the things that we can learn by trying to understand your health problems can be applied to help a lot of other people too.
Oh, that's great. So we're almost like guinea pigs for the whole world for the next generation.
Exactly.
I'm
trying to motivate why it's important. Like people think, oh, well, eventually they'll all be gone.
When I saw that train derailment in Ohio, and I heard things that were being said, and in my view, things that were intentionally being covered up or not said by the media or by the government, I'm like, they're experiencing some of the same things that we're experiencing, and we know why, you know?
Yeah.
So when I say we know why,
appreciation for the Gulf War veterans.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, it's true, because that's what a lot of people don't understand. It's not like we're asking anybody for anything except for the truth. That's what we want, is the truth.
Absolutely.
And
well, you want the truth, and you deserve the help.
Yeah, that shit we ain't getting, but that's going to be in this topic too. So let's get into the next topic.
Okay. So I guess I could talk about studies that we're just finishing up or studies that are ongoing. And I'll mention, I guess, two that we're finishing up. Well, I'll mention one that we're finishing up because we need your guys' help in finding some healthy Gulf War veterans. We are doing a study that's looking at what's called gene expression. And so, everybody inherits different genes. You inherit them from your mom and from your dad, and somebody else has a different mom and a different dad, and they have different genes, which is why they look different and act different and have different vulnerabilities. So we understand that when people have different genes, they can be vulnerable to different things. Some people are going to be vulnerable to diabetes or, more vulnerable to certain kinds of health problems. But it's also the case that two people that have the same genes, those genes can be different, amounts of the protein that those genes make. Genes code for proteins. They code for amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and then assemble into these proteins. So if two people have, for example, that PB pill that a lot of Gulf War veterans take, that's detoxified by an enzyme, which is a protein that serves a function. And that enzyme has a fancy name, butyrylcholinesterase, or BCHE, that helps clear PB. Well, it turns out that some people have a variant of that butyrylcholinesterase that is pretty bad at clearing PB. And back in the 1990s, I said, well, gee, maybe those people have more illness if they were exposed to PB. And in fact, Lee Steele did a study in 2015 showing that was true, that people who have the crappy ability to detoxify PB, they weren't predestined to become ill. If they didn't have PB, they weren't more ill. People who had PB and had the regular variants had about a 2.6-fold higher rate of Gulf War illness. But people who had the PB and the impaired ability to detoxify it had a 40-fold increased risk of illness. So that shows how important these genes can be. But it turns out that it's not just which variant you have, but how much of it you have. Like if you've got the good variant, but you don't have any, your body's hardly making any of it, then you still can't detoxify the PB. So this study is looking at what's called gene expression, how much that DNA is turned into RNA that then is used to build up those proteins.
So to interrupt you a second, Doc, so you're looking for healthy Gulf War veterans.
Right now, we are looking for healthy Gulf War veterans.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
they are hard to find.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is your definition? So no known issue. So if you served in the Gulf and you don't know that you have problems, then you would want them to contact you.
Yeah, and then we would screen you, and you can't meet the Kansas criteria for Gulf War illness or the CDC criteria for Gulf War illness.
For those individuals that perhaps are healthy from the Gulf War. And
you know what? Let me put it this way. Contact us if you're healthy or if you're not, and we will find a study for you either way.
Oh, that's good. That's good. But
and let you know what you're eligible for, and you can decide if you want to participate.
But you're in the state of California, though, yes?
But the good news is, for that one study, we can fly people out.
Oh, awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, so I just want you to know that somebody did put this down. They said, good luck.
You know what? Let me tell you guys, we're out in the Midwest and we can't participate in much research because of our distance to labs, even when they say, oh, you can do it all across the nation.
Right.
We have found that we can't because we don't have certified labs in our area. It's 4 hours away. This is the closest one. So, but Pete's participating in quite a few of
And you're in South Dakota, right, Kristi?
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah. So I'm in Iowa, Kevin's in Texas. So
right. So we got like Wade and we got Jeremy. I know Jeremy's on here. Shane. I mean, if y'all know anybody who wants to participate in this study to find out if you're healthy or you're not healthy, do it, because this is what's important. I can tell you I'm not healthy.
Right.
Because I was diagnosed in 1995, and symptoms and the stuff that I have going on with my body is going to be different than what John has, because I also believe it's also in the different areas we were also at. You know,
yeah. Some of you guys had the oil well fire. Some of you were right by the Conacia, where they demolished the munitions depot that had the sarin and cyclosarin. You know, some people that were deployed to the front often had a lot more exposures than some people that weren't. So yeah, 100% right that people had different exposures, and that you're right also contributes to both how likely you are to be ill. People who went into Iraq and Kuwait have higher rates of illness than people who didn't, for example, and also to some degree the profile of illness.
And see, and I got the double whammy because I was on a supply ship, so I pulled in all these ports. So I was in and out of ports. We know Saddam was spraying us with sarin gas and mustard gas. Who knows what the heck he put in the freaking waters out there? Well, you know, we just don't know. I mean, so and you're right about that. It is. There are people who are a lot worse off than us, like Pete. You know, but everybody's body is completely different. And I think that's what's neat about everybody doing all these different studies and doing all this stuff and helping out. I mean, I hate to say this, it isn't really, this may sound really bad, everybody. I got a lot of people listening right now. This really isn't for us. It's for the next generations that come. That's how I feel about it. These studies. Now, if we can find a medicine and a certain thing that, hey, we can take this away, I'm just worried about, is it too late, Doc?
Right. And I'm with you. I mean, I don't know that we're going to find a cure, but there are a lot of diseases that we, quote, manage.
Right.
And we did do like a coenzyme Q10 treatment trial where we did show significant improvement in symptoms. Like 19 out of the 20 symptoms that we looked at did better in the CoQ10 group than in the placebo group. And the only one that didn't was about neutral. It was about the same, and it was sleep problems. And it's known that the one side effect that CoQ10 can cause is sleep problems because it revs up cell energy if you take it too close to bedtime. For some people, they sleep worse. Some people sleep better. So that one was about neutral, but just on the negative side. But 19 of the 20 were on the good side, and a number of those were statistically significant individually. Like 19 out of 20, like, is very, very far different from chance. It's like 4 in 100,000 prospect that chance could be responsible. So, but by convention, anything that's less than 1 in 20 is considered significant. So this is very, very, very highly statistically significant. But yeah, even individually, a number of the symptoms were strongly benefited. Everybody's different, and not everybody gets equal benefit. But that's an example of something. And also even objectively measured function, where you have people do things like time chair rises. 40% of people got better on placebo because you're repeating the same exercise, but 80% of people got better on the CoQ10, and that was significant also. So twice as many people got better. So there are treatments that do seem to be helpful to people. And mostly they seem to be treatments that address cell energy and or antioxidation, which are two of these key mechanisms that are important across many, many, many different, the toxic effects of many different drugs and chemicals and radiation no matter what their supposed mechanism of action is, like we just talked about these organophosphates and carbamates, supposedly they're acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, which they are, and that is responsible for some of the toxicity, but we know that a lot of it is through these shared toxic mechanisms, because if you give animals high quality antioxidants, either just before or just after you expose them, you protect them from death by organophosphates, and you protect them from the chronic cognitive problems from organophosphates. Yes.
I'm gonna jump in here and throw in full reverse here just for a brief second, so those listeners, so we can refresh my memories back. So full forward reverse. Kristi, back to Pete. So I have a refresher. Pete was in the Army, yes? Or
he's an engineer, 43rd engineer.
Okay, that's what I thought. He was an engineer. So the reason I wanted to reverse is because we were talking a little bit about, about one individual or one unit might had a higher exposure rate than the next. And the engineer, I mean, we all had our various jobs, like everybody. And how was it you came in contact, or how did you learn from Dr. Golomb and her studies? Because I don't recall what the connection was, just for our listeners, and including myself.
Our connection started with her one of her studies. It was on the physician, not physician, but what is it? Physician what?
The physician attitudes toward Gulf War illness.
Yeah. Yes, that's how we started connecting, and I have to tell you, it doing that has actually helped blow off a lot of
steam.
And steam, it has. And I fill those out. Pete's right there with me putting this together, and send it in. We feel better that somebody's listening and hearing us.
And we want people to fill out that survey. If you're a Gulf War veteran, contact us. Yeah.
Hold on, Doc. We're now going to go in. This is going to be our part 1, because now we're going to go into part 2, because this is going to be an hour long. Stay with us, everybody. We got another 30 more minutes, because there's a lot of information that's still coming on. And so, thank everybody for listening. And now we're going to go into part 2. We're staying on air. Thank you for listening to Gulf War Side Effects. If you have a story, or you would like to share, or just come on with any comments or questions, please email me at kevinsimon@gulfwarsideeffects.com.